So today I wanted to talk about discipline, and the odds are you don't actually have a discipline problem. So I've managed to figure out what works well for me in terms of wanting and continuing to stay disciplined towards the things I genuinely feel like I want in life. And for me, once I've dialed these, daily and weekly habits in, it's made it simple and relatively easy to stay disciplined. So what I mean is your lack of discipline or the fact that you have a problem with it, that's not actually the case. You just don't actually want the things that you say you do. So if you think about, the goals that you have and the things that you're telling yourself you want, like when you imagine that thing, I want you to be really self-critical here. Are you doing it because you actually want the end result? Or are you doing it because you're imagining how the external world is going to react to you having that thing? So is it coming from in here, or is it coming from that external validation that you feel like you're going to have once that's actually achieved? Because at least in the space of the law of attraction manifestation side of YouTube and self-improvement, a lot of times we'll talk about visualizing success. And what I've had fallen into the trap of is I would visualize other people and how they were reacting to me rather than the internal feeling of fulfillment that I personally would have from doing that. There's now a disconnect between us and the actual force that drives us forward towards the things that we say that we want, that ultimately fuels that discipline. So yes, I'm telling you that the thing that you're saying you want that you're not acting towards, maybe you don't actually want the thing. And this isn't like a you don't want it bad enough type of speech, anything like that. This is like a you actually may not want that thing. Because if you truly wanted that thing, you would be fighting tooth and nail to make damn sure it happens, and you would adjust your entire lifestyle around doing that thing. So this goes beyond oh, my dopamine circuits are fried. This is more like what's actually speaking to you internally, and have you been fed everything from the outside world that you should want these things? And this goes beyond the status quo of oh, the corporate 9 to 5. This even goes along with the hustle grind culture, entrepreneurial culture of YouTube and online business now. And so this feeds into do we actually know who we are? At a very deep level. Do we know what drives us? Do we know ourselves? And ultimately, who do we want to be? And so then we know, we'll think about it and we'll have an idea of who we feel like we're supposed to be. But then the real question becomes how do we change? And that leads to down a whole other overthinking and anxiety-ridden rabbit hole because there's 1,000 different methods out there to change. It takes no shortage of going to YouTube and typing in, how do I change my current situation, to realize there is an infinite number of ways. So the problem is it's not that we don't have enough information on how to change, but the real question is, how do we want to change? How do we set ourselves up to actually want to be disciplined and to want to change ourselves down to the level of our own identity and the way that we see ourselves relative to everything else outside of us? And this is where things are difficult, because 99% of people, they're going to go to YouTube, look up, journaling methods to change or to find your purpose or whatever. The problem with those things is those are all just band-aids. They're reliefs. It's not the actual cure. And so I read this quote or something out of Anthony DeMello's Awareness book, and it talks about 99% of people just want relief. They don't want the cure, because the cure is painful. And the cure requires you cutting out a part of yourself and then an intense healing and grieving process in order to actually have those things happen. And so there is a certain level of pain that we have to be okay going through. And pain isn't necessarily fear, but it's also just a lack of motivation. It's boredom. It's just not really feeling like you want to do the things that you know you should be doing to get to whatever goal it is that you have on a daily basis. Being in sales, I see it every day. People are in pain. They want to get out of pain. And ultimately, once it comes to a point of actually needing to get a little bit uncomfortable, doing things that maybe you haven't ever done before, people just don't want to do that. And it makes sense, because if you think about it, like, letting go of the old part of ourselves is tough. But what's harder is reforming those things into a new way, reforming the way that we see the world and the connections that our brain makes. And so, we will rationalize like, oh, it's not the right time. There's going to be a better time that I'll be able to do this. But as we go through life, we know like things continue to pile up, and there's never really a perfect time. So it really comes down to a certain level of want to, and how do we want to actually do those things? And I can't necessarily tell you exactly what it is you need to do in order to change your life or change your identity. But what I have figured out for myself anyway is I know how to want to change, and I know how to give myself enough energy in order to do that. So what you have to understand about shifting identity in the brain is our brain is wired for consistency. It does not want to change. And that's because it is very metabolically, like energetically expensive for a brain to form new thought patterns and to form new reactions to situations, because how it's wired is it's wired for survival. It's wired to want things to be the same. It's wired to need to go through the consistent things so it can conserve energy, because there was a time when we didn't know whenever we were going to eat again. So everything the brain does is designed to conserve that energy. And so creating a new version of ourselves requires a surplus of energy. It requires more energy than what we would normally have. And so in order to actually change your identity, you first have to start with having a surplus of energy. And when you have a surplus of energy, more energy than what you're used to, all of a sudden you have motivation to do things. You want to change. And that's what the foundation of this is about. And this is going to be some very tactical things that you can do in order to actually want to change yourself. And it all comes down to just your day-to-day state. How are you treating yourself on a day-to-day basis in such a way that improves the amount of energy you have to give to things and give to new habits? And how much clarity of mind do you have? Because I've always been a relatively lazy person. And it wasn't until within the last couple of years that I had made noticeable improvements in my energy levels and my state. And I noticed I have more motivation to do things as a byproduct of having those higher energy levels. So if you look at even like professional athletes or bodybuilders, it's not hard for them to train. It's not hard for them to stick to their diet and to take their recovery seriously and to do things every single day in excess of what most people would do. And that's because your state and the energy levels that you have on a day-to-day basis lays the foundation of everything that you want to do, of every purpose that you want to try to actualize. So before, starting to work towards any goal, you need to start by dialing in your state. So how are you showing up? And the easiest way is you'll just want to start with your physical body. So this is a way that you're going to get immediate feedback, and you're going to know, okay, this is what's working and this is what's not. So this is going to come in the form of sleep, your nutrition, your training, and getting outside into nature, sunlight, vitamin D. It's a wonder, right? So you don't have to spend a lot of money, and you don't need a bunch of complex gadgets or methods in order to do this. This isn't like a biohacking routine. This is very, very basic. And I want you to look at this in terms of ROI. So what can you give the least amount of effort to and get the largest amount of return? So whenever it comes to sleep, 7 to 8 hours a night, blackout curtains, window tape, a blackout sleep mask, mouth tape even, earplugs, no food 2 hours before bed so that you're not waking up from your body just digesting a ton of things. No electronics in your room. That way there's not blue light going on so that your sleep cycles don't get disturbed. And sleeping and waking up at the same times consistently every week. And this is so that your body starts to get into a rhythm, because whenever you have a rhythm, when you have a predictable way of going about things, all of a sudden things get easier to do because your mind kind of gets into a flow. And flow is ultimately what makes it easier to do hard things or challenging things or things that we don't traditionally want to do. Now, if we move on to nutrition, what we want to look out for is, about 0.75 grams per pound of body weight in protein. Super easy to do. Your body needs protein to recover. And it's more than just muscles. Protein does a lot more than just grow muscles in your body. At least 2 liters of water daily with electrolytes. So your body needs to have a sufficient amount of water going through it, because our body's like 80% water. So why would you not hydrate yourself accordingly and make sure that you're constantly filled up on those things? Limit the amount of processed foods you have. Processed foods alone is going to lead to less brain fog. It's going to lead to doing things better. It's going to lead to clarity. And ultimately, what you're looking at during these phases of trying to become more disciplined is some level of clarity that you hadn't had previously. Okay, and I can't say this enough whenever it comes to eating healthier. Use seasonings. Something I see so many people doing is they'll go on this kick of trying to eat healthy, and then they'll wonder why they can't stick to it. Well, they're eating the most plain foods in existence. Use seasonings. There's no calories with them. They add flavor. Okay, it makes it more enjoyable. And when things are more enjoyable, you're more likely just to continue to do it. And so then you'll want to focus on your training. What are you doing in the gym, or what are you doing for exercise? It doesn't matter what you do. Just do some form of cardio or weights or a combination of the two. I'm not a dogmatic whenever it comes to what type of exercise routine, as long as you're getting active, as long as you're doing something that raises your heart rate or pushes you physically so you can get out of your head and actually into your body. And you'll want to push yourself in the weight room close to failure if you are going. Like, push yourself to a point where it's so uncomfortable that you don't want to go on and do one more rep. That is where character's built. That's what's going to continue to push you through those times when you actually don't feel like doing it and you have higher energy levels, because that's going to be necessary for you to get to the goals that you're telling yourself you actually want. There is a certain level of pro athlete mentality that you absolutely have to have. And if you have that pro athlete mentality where you're taking your day-to-day seriously, you're taking your training seriously, everything else in your life is going to get better, because you're going to start to see the parallels as to how those things interact. So how are you showing up to work? How are you doing admin tasks? Are you doing it efficiently? Are you doing it on time whenever you're telling people that you're going to have a certain project to them done by a certain time? Like, these things matter, and they feed into every other area of your life. And so the last point is, you just want to get into nature. Get outside. Get vitamin D. Our bodies are not meant to be inside 24/7. We need sunlight. We need fresh air. And there's a certain, and I mean, like, I don't want to get too woo-woo, but there's a certain connection to nature that you get that you don't get from being indoors, in terms of like how you see life, the way that you see the world, because you realize that the world is not always as bad as what we are making it out to be. And so you'd be shocked how much you learn about yourself if you go outside without any tech, away from social media, and you start to try to find ways to understand yourself and the way that your mind works whenever you're not bombarded with every fucking social media algorithm in existence. Because part of your issue is that you haven't made an attempt to actually reconnect with yourself and the things that you want. And so you're believing what everybody outside of you is telling you that you want. But where the magic happens is being able to know for yourself what truly connects with you, down to like an identity level. Like, what actually makes you tick. And so these are just some of the things that I have done that have dramatically helped me in terms of actually wanting to be disciplined. Because once you get all these other areas right, especially in terms of sleep and just your health, your state improves dramatically. And whenever your state is able to improve dramatically, all of a sudden you have more energy to want to be disciplined and do things that you know are good for you. So I hope this helps. Feel free to leave a comment if it did. But until next time, peace.